Hello? There we go. A few years back, before we had Church Multiplication Associates, we were just a small, little denominational church planting board in Southern California and Arizona, wanting to plant churches. And we were learning from the best. My heroes were Rick Warren and Bill Hybels, and Bob Logan was coaching us to how to start churches. And we started some good churches. One of the first church plants we had was in Chandler, Arizona. And the church was doing well for about 3 years. And one night, I got a call from the pastor, the church planter, and he says, "I quit." I said, "What do you mean you quit?" He says, I'm resigning. I turned in my resignation. It's already been done. I'm done with this. I said, "Well, what's going on?" He says, "Well, we've had some disagreements, and rather than split the church, I've chosen to leave. It's the most honorable thing." I said, "What are you disagreeing about?" He started to tell me, and I knew I had to go out there. So I got a ticket on Southwest Airlines. I flew over to Arizona. I met with every elder or every leader in the church and the pastor. I met with the wives, the families, everybody. And I said, "What's going on?" And here's what the problem was. The leaders of the church felt strongly that they needed to be ordained as elders so that the church could then be an official church and recognized on the denominational floor, and then they could vote. And the pastor felt, "Well, we're not going to make you an elder till we see that you're qualified and ready to be an elder." And that was what the disagreement was. And I was so discouraged that I took myself out to lunch. That's something some of you need to do. At least have some good company, right? So I go out to lunch, and I'm sitting there thinking, and they stirred up this whole question for me. Well, what is a church? Is a church having a constitution and bylaws and being able to vote on the denominational floor? Is that what church is? So I'm asking this question, and the waitress comes and takes my order, and I notice that she has a fish sign on her ring. I think, isn't that just like the Lord, you know? She takes my order, she goes away, and I'm thinking, the Lord is showing me church is much bigger than bylaws and constitutions, isn't it? You know, because the fish sign was originally started when the church was pushed underground. If you made an ark in the dirt and somebody finished it, formed a fish, then you know they were a brother in the Lord or a sister in the Lord. You could fellowship freely without fear of persecution. And it's been a symbol ever since. How many of you got one around your neck right now or on your car? Yeah. It's how we let the world know we're Christians, right? So she comes back, and I determine I'm going to have church right here. We're going to fellowship. She brings me my chicken, sits it down. I say, "I noticed you had a fish sign on your ring. I just want to know, are you a Christian?" She said, "No, I'm a Pisces." Okay. Isn't that just like the Lord? I get all my hopes up, and boom, they're dashed. But the Lord was teaching me something. It's not about constitutions and bylaws, but it's not about bumper stickers and T-shirts. It's not that way that we let the world know that we're Christians. It's by our love for one another. So it sent me on a dangerous journey to discover the question, what is church? And I want to look at Matthew chapter 16, because there's twice Jesus mentions church. The first time is in Matthew chapter 16. Verse 13, we'll start there. He says, "Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?'" Just like our Lord to give us a midterm exam. That's what it is. 2 questions to the midterm. The first one's really easy. Who do people say that I am? And they say John the Baptist, some say Elijah or Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And they're all answering, because it's easy to answer a question when it's not you that's going to be at fault. We love to talk about the faults and mistakes of other people. But in this case, that's not what it was. In this case, they were rattling off all the other people and their mistakes, and that was only the warm-up question. Then he asked the real question, "Who do you say that I am?" And I imagine it got silent. I think all the eyes went to the floor, because you get this question wrong, it's you who's wrong, not somebody else. And it happens to be the most important question you'll ever be asked. And I think slowly all the heads turned Peter's way, because if anyone hates silence, it's Peter. And they're all kind of hoping he'll say something, right or wrong, to get them off the hook. Sure enough, he steps up and he says, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And all the heads turn to Jesus. Is he right? And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because you cheated on the test." That's my paraphrase, New American Standard Version.
But he actually said, flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. You see, we all cheated on the test. The answer was given to us by someone else, by God. You don't figure it out because of your education or your good looks or your affiliation with any kind of club or church. It's all given to you by heaven and only by heaven. It comes from him. And then Jesus speaks about the church. He says one sentence and it speaks volumes. He says, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. But I want you to backtrack just a little. Why does he start with this question? Most of us who have started churches start with questions. We start with good questions. We also start with the wrong questions. Who are we going to reach? How are we going to reach them? What model of church are we going to use? What kind of music are we going to use? Who's going to do this and who's going to do that? These are the questions we begin with. What are the needs of the community? All good questions, all the wrong question. Jesus, when he talks about church, he starts with one question. Who is Jesus to you? Because you answer that question right, church planting comes naturally. You answer that question wrong, and all of your church planting will be hard, difficult, and fruitless. Because it all begins with the question, who is Jesus to me? Is Jesus the king? If he's the king, then you'll do things differently. Does he have all authority of heaven and earth? How would you like to have that guy on your church planting team? See the one who opens the door and no one can shut? I don't know about you, but I want him on my church planting team. See, when you begin to realize who Jesus really is, you'll do everything different. But if he's weak and passive and he needs your help, then the way you go about doing church for him is going to be pitiful. And the world's not going to be that attracted to it. But when Jesus is doing it, then it's powerful. So maybe the first question we need to ask ourselves is not who we're trying to reach and how we're trying to reach them, what kind of model we're going to have, but who is Jesus to me? And I got to tell you, I've been doing this for a few years now. I still have to ask myself that question. Any difficulty comes across my desk, any problem I have in home or home church, I need to ask the question, well, who is Jesus? And it reframes the entire question. It begins with Jesus. Then he talks about church. He says, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. A couple observations. He says, upon this rock I will build my church. He doesn't say you will build his church. That is not your job. It's never been your job. And if you're the one building the church, then have pity. It's not going to be worth it. It's something Jesus does. I will build my church. Then he says, it's my church, not yours. I will build my church, not your church. Not a Baptist church or Episcopal church or a Brethren church. He said, I will build my church. And we need to realize whose church it really is. And pastors, it's time to give it back to Jesus. We never should have taken it. And there's many times I've had to do that. You know, there's many times where I have had this discussion with Jesus. I've had it out with him, and finally I just say, hey, it's your church. You take it. I don't want it. And he always takes it back and does something beautiful with it. And I'm just now learning to give it to him much sooner. And we all need to do that. He says it should be growing. I believe in church growth. It should be growing because it says, I will build my church. Buildings don't get smaller while they're being built, they get larger. And the church should be growing. But I don't think it should be growing fat. See, I used to grow. When I was younger, I grew. Till I reached my early 20s and I stopped growing. And until I reached my early 40s, and then I started growing again. Does anybody else have that experience? And I think a lot of us think once I start a church, it needs to keep growing. What happens is we grow and then we start growing. And we get fatter and fatter. That's not the way the human race was meant to grow. We were to be fruitful and multiply. The way we are to grow is to give birth to the next generation. Not continually just growing one church. And there's opposition. He says the gates of hell will not prevail against you. That's good news, isn't it? Now I want to make an observation. How many of you have gates in your home? Anybody have a gate? What do you use your gate for? To keep people out? Keep dogs in? Gates are not offensive weapons, are they? They're for protection, on defense. And these are not pearly gates in heaven. These are the gates of hell. Jesus is saying something about our church we need to pay attention to. He's saying your church is not on defense, but on offense. See, gates are not offensive weapons. Police officers don't drive with loaded gates. Terrorists don't hold people at gate point. You don't see little dogs running around with signs that say, "Beware of gate," because a gate isn't a threat to anybody. And hell's gates cannot stop you, people. With Jesus in you, there is nothing that can stop you. There is no force on earth that can stop the church from accomplishing the mission given to her by Jesus. Can you say that with me? There is no force, say it, on earth capable of preventing the church from accomplishing the mission given to her by Jesus, except her own lack of faith. The only thing holding you back is you don't believe what you just said. Jesus said the gates of hell shall not prevail. So what's stopping us? All authority of heaven and earth is given to me, Jesus said, and I'm with you. Whoa, did you connect those dots? I think that should make a difference in my life. How about you? More of a difference than any program or preaching or doctrine that I happen to hold to or buildings that I have. It's the presence of Jesus in us that is the hope of glory. And that's given freely to all who would follow him. And we can knock the gates of hell down and set the captives free. Now, in order to understand that, we need to understand that church begins with Jesus in you, Christ in you. That is so potent, it will change the world. And it's in every one of us. Now, we have come to understand that church is a living thing. It's organic, and it has a DNA. Raise your hand if you have DNA. Yeah, see, the truth is you all have DNA, just some of you don't have the chromosome for lifting the hand. That's okay. We all have a DNA. Now, show me your DNA. Well, here it is, right? Where is the DNA in your body? We have a DNA in the Christ body. The DNA is divine truth. Say that with me. Divine truth, nurturing relationship, and apostolic mission. This is the DNA of the church. Now, Jesus never mentioned DNA because it hadn't been discovered by people. No one would have understood it. So he used the analogy of a seed, but it carries the same idea. Within the seed is the life of the entire tree. And that's the DNA, divine truth, nurturing relationship, apostolic mission. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go and make disciples of all the nations. That's the DNA. Now, quite frankly, a lot of our churches are good on the D, good on the N, and they need a kick in the A. Right? We're not very apostolic in our mission. In fact, some of us have twisted around to be divine truth, nurturing relationships, and attractional mission. We expect the world to come to us. But actually, if you knew you had the authority of heaven at your back, and you knew that the gates of hell could not prevail against you, what is stopping you from taking the kingdom of God out there? We need to have the DNA intact, but you can't separate it. Don't hire a staff pastor for truth and a staff pastor for relationships and another missions pastor and divide it all up and have a committee for each one and a program for each one, because you see, the DNA is only potent when it is together. When it is separate in its component parts, it doesn't have the power to transform. So we need to keep it intact together in the church at all times. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I know where our church is weak and where our church is strong, so let me beef up the weak areas. But you see, that's not what if you were sick and it was a problem with your genes, then taking a pill won't fix it, right? Because the problem is in every cell of your body. The solution to having a healthy church that can take on the gates of hell, make a difference, is having a healthy DNA in every tiny cell of the body. And I think that's where we must begin. If the disciple doesn't have the DNA in his life, the divine truth, nurturing relationships, and apostolic mission, then you are failing, because your church is only as good as her disciples. You can have a state-of-the-art facility, outstanding preaching and wonderful worship. You could have great children's programs, but that's not ultimately how your church will be judged. Every church will be judged by the quality of your disciples. And if your disciples are passive and unengaged consumers that are applauding on Sunday and going home and forgetting about it on Monday, then no matter how many people come to your church, you are not a healthy church. And until your disciples are strong, vibrant, alive, walking in the DNA with a noticeable presence of Christ in their life, then you're not a healthy church. Church is only as good as her disciples. And so, if you want to get DNA back in your church, you can't program it in. Having everybody read even a good book like Organic Church is not going to do it. What you have to do is build relationships one-on-one with people and make sure they understand it's the divine presence of Christ in your life, in relationship with others, while on mission together, that will be health. And that will spread like a virus through the body. And that's where it all begins. Because ultimately your church is only as good as your disciples. Thanks.